Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing weeks 14 through 18 of my 2024 reads. I took April off from filming because life was still very busy, so now I have quite a few things to wrap up for you. Because April was busy, it was mainly just SFF and romance, which are kind of my go-to comfort reads, but I'm starting to find myself picking up my reading again. I did pick a couple of new releases, which was nice. So I'll talk about that at the end of the video, just sort of where my reading is at, what my plans for filming are. Also, there is some road construction going on, so just if there's any background noise, sorry about that. First, let me tell you about the new releases that I have picked up recently, starting with The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. This was so wonderful. I really love Katherine Arden's works. I've loved her Bear and the Nightingale series. I've also really loved her middle grade horror series, Small Spaces. And so I was very excited when this came out, but it really lived up to my expectations. This was so good. So this is a historical, kind of gothic, creepy fantasy set during World War I, where we follow a Canadian woman who has been a nurse during the war, but she's been injured and sent home. And then she is sent the sort of belongings of her brother, who her younger brother is a soldier in the war. And it seems like maybe he's died, except no one can quite give her information. So she decides to go back to the front and look for him. This story is so wonderful. It is really deeply embedded in history. So the vibrancy of what's going on kind of socially, politically in the world at that time. Really, World War I itself is very huge in this story. It is a war story. There's actually quite a bit of violence related to the war. I was a little surprised how okay with it I was, and I think it's because it just felt so true to what was going on in World War I. But this story is kind of gothic in feel. It's got a creepiness, and the further you go, the more mysterious it is what has happened to the brother. There are ghosts, there are demons, there are all sorts of things going on in this, and it is just beautiful writing, very atmospheric, and it's all about kind of dealing with trauma. There's a lot of trauma that the characters have gone through, not just the war. There's been other traumatic events as well, and their family relationships, and just kind of dealing with how trauma changes you and changes your relationships. It is stunning. I absolutely loved this. I really highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up The Butcher of the Forest by Premee Mohamed. This is another new release fantasy. This is a novella that is sort of like a dark fairy tale. It's about a woman who lives in a kingdom that has been conquered by sort of a dictator type of person. And they live on the edge of this forest that if you go into, you never come out of. And his children have gone missing into the forest. And she's the only person who has ever gone into the forest and brought somebody out before. And so he forces her to go. But this is very dangerous, it's very tricky, and she doesn't really know if she'll be able to do it. So it's really about this quest for her to go and get the children, and dealing with the kind of very tricky magical beings that live in the forest and all of the dangers. It's very hard to escape this forest alive, and so it's about that. I think that the atmosphere in this was really wonderful. It is got that dark fairy tale feel that I absolutely loved. So really interesting world building, really interesting kind of design of this creepy magical forest, and that kind of gothic atmosphere I loved. The story itself, like the way that the plot kind of goes forward, there's a couple of little things where it didn't quite make sense to me, and I'm not sure that the ending quite held together as much as I'd like it to, but I just really enjoyed this, and it's a very nice kind of short novella. So if you like atmospheric dark fantasy, I think that you'll enjoy this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And the other new release that I picked up was The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka, which is the second book in her Massa and Pleiades series, which is a sci-fi kind of cozy mystery series, sort of Holmesian in style, with a detective and a professor who team up, and their sort of second chance romance sapphic relationship. This series is super cozy and sweet. I loved the first book, The Mimicking of Known Successes, so I was really excited to pick this one up. And it's also got the same really really, really cool world building. So this is set on Jupiter, where humanity had to leave Earth because it was no longer habitable. And so they've got this really interesting way of living on Jupiter, on these raised platforms. And it's got this great atmosphere, really interesting culture. I think Malka does a great job of thinking through, okay, how would humanity adapt and how would culture change if they were living in this situation? So that is fantastic. I think the mystery in this was also really good. I enjoyed the mystery. It was just very slow and gentle in the way that it kind of unfolded. In this one, the mystery is that there are some missing students from the university that Massa is investigating and gets Plady to help her with. There's also a development of their relationship in this, and I think that that part wasn't quite as much to my taste here because there was just a little bit of angst, and I knew that there would be because Angela at Literature Science Alliance, who I'll link below, had talked about this and said this is a little bit angsty. So I knew that might not work for me as well, but I still overall quite enjoyed the story and just enjoyed being back in this world. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely pick up more books if she writes them in the series. Then I picked up some cozy SFF, starting with The Riverbank by Kij Johnson. This is a reread for me. I'd read it a year or 2 ago because Becca at Read Becca, who I will link below, had recommended that I pick it up. She thought I would really like it, and I loved it. And my husband, Sush, has been meaning to read it for a while, but he mainly listens to things on audio, and we don't have the audio for this at our library. And so we've been looking for some more cozy things to read out loud to each other, and so we chose this one. So I read this out loud to him, and it was fantastic. I mean, just lovely. This book is just so wonderful. So it is basically set in the same world as The Wind and the Willows, so with Toad and Badger and the Water Rat and everybody. And basically into town after the events of The Wind and the Willow come 2 new characters, Miss Mole and Miss Rabbit. And the men of the, Toad and all of the other guys are just like, oh, women, I don't know about this. And so it's all about sort of them being in the community and some tensions between them and some of the male characters. And then also Toad being Toad and getting up to some real hijinks and getting everybody involved. It is just gentle and sweet and fun. It has that same tone that The Wind in the Willows has, but it also has a lot of just kind of more modern social commentary and feminist lens and all this sort of thing. So it is really fantastic, and I highly recommend reading this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would happily reread this again. Then I picked up Love Crafted by Raven's Dagger. Raven's Dagger writes a lot of really cozy SFF. This is maybe less cozy than I would ideally like, but it is cozy in a weird way. So this is basically a Lovecraftian or cosmic horror type of fantasy sci-fi, and it is focused on kind of this almost steampunky world that has magic through summoning and some other things. And we follow a character who is a teenage girl who wants to get into the Magic Academy, but you have to have a summoned familiar. And so she summons one, but what she summons, instead of just a talking parrot or something, is basically one of these elder gods. And the elder god is sort of put into this little body of a cute little girl. So there's like this weird juxtaposition through the whole book of the cuteness of the little girl and the cuteness of the things, and then the monstrousness sort of inside. And she likes to eat everything, teacups and people and all sorts of things, and has tentacles and all sorts of things. So it's kind of playing around with the idea of Lovecraftian monsters, but made cute. And totally that part I get. It's actually pretty neat world building. I think Raven's Dagger always does amazing world building, but it does get just a little gross sometimes for me, just a little bit more than I want with like ripping people apart and things like that. So not so much my style there. And this is a little bit of fan service in terms of the person who summoned her, this teenage girl, her best friend, another girl, has a crush on her, and so there's like this kind of romance between them, but it goes just a little fan service-y, a little bit too innuendo filled for me. So that part wasn't so much my style. It is still pretty cozy, and so it did kind of work for me, but not as much as the other books by Raven's Dagger. So this one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up quite a bit of romance, starting with continuing with the Worth Saga series by Courtney Milan. So last month I had read The Devil Comes Courting and absolutely loved it, and it was the third book in a series, so I thought, okay, let me go back to the beginning and start with the first book. So I picked up Once Upon a Marquess. This is a story about a woman whose parents, like her father and her older brother, basically were convicted of treason, and it sort of destroyed their lives. Her brother and father are out of the picture, and so she's now the eldest, trying to take care of her younger siblings. It's 10 years after the events of that, and they've really fallen on hard times, and she's struggling to keep them together. But she reaches out to a guy that she sort of had a thing for before everything happened, to get help with handling some things with her sisters. And they've got a little bit of a contentious relationship because he was the one who had to testify against her father and brother about the treason, because he's the one who sort of discovered it. So they've got quite a bit of contention there, quite a bit of trauma and hurt that they're dealing with, but it's about that kind of them coming back together and finding a relationship past that trauma. So I think Courtney Milan does really silly and fun banter. Here goes a little bit too silly for me at times, but it's also just nice to lighten the mood because they're actually dealing with some heavy things, like quite a bit of trauma. The hero in this also is dealing with, I think it's not explicitly said, but I think he's maybe autistic, and he's got quite, it's been quite challenging for him to handle things. He's also had a drug addiction in the past, and so just him dealing with his own things, and then her dealing with the trauma of what's happened to her family and where she wants to go from here, and then learning how to find a relationship together. So I thought it was like a really interesting thing. Plus there's some interesting historical and social commentary that's going on in this. It's set in the Victorian period, and I think that, it was a really fun book, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I continued on in the series and picked up the next book, Her Every Wish. This is a novella, and it follows just a side character, a friend of the heroine from the main book in the first novel. And she basically is somebody who is, maybe her family used to be middle class, but they've fallen on hard times, so never nobility, but she's really struggling to get by. She works at a flower shop, and she's trying to basically find a way to raise herself and her mother out of poverty. And so she applies for this competition where the winner can get some funds to start their own business. And the competition really is only meant for men. And so she's struggling against that. And her old lover comes into the picture and, is trying to help her win this prize by giving her confidence and things like that. And so it's just like a really sweet second chance romance about this woman who kind of lacks confidence in herself, but also really finds herself constantly wanting better for her life and not wanting to accept people telling her that she's worthless. And we've got a hero in this who has dealt with a lot of prejudice against him because, he's kind of a mixture of races, and his family is like even more poor and all these sorts of things. So just both of them kind of dealing with the way that society treats them and trying to find value in themselves and support each other. And like, I liked the way that developed. So this was really fun, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, which is a new release and is the third book in the series that started with Part of Your World. This is about a woman and a guy who basically meet online because he posts on Reddit about him having this issue where everybody that he dates, after they break up with him, ends up going on to then find their soulmate and like get married and live happily ever after. And after he posts about this, she messages him and says, hey, I have the same issue. And so they decide to date each other so that then after they break up, they will then find their soulmates and be happy forever. And so it's like a very cute little premise, but it actually, as the story goes along, deals with quite a bit of heavier content. They're each dealing with some really hard stuff going on in their life. The heroine has a mom who is just really, really toxic, and it's very much traumatized her and made it hard for her to actually form attachments. And the hero in this is dealing with basically having to take on all of his younger siblings because his mom is no longer able to take care of them. And so he's becoming sort of like this sudden almost dad figure with all of these kids, which isn't what he expected to happen in his life. So he's got a lot of changes and responsibilities that are going on too. So it's so much about what's going on in their lives, as well as about them kind of finding each other and connecting and learning to sort of trust and open up. So yeah, this was really good. I think that often there's just like a little hint of some of the, I don't know what to call it, like some of the implied messages of Abby Jimenez books where I'm like, I'm not so sure if I agree with that. Like just, you know, instant love and like the universe putting you together and these sorts of things where I think it's meant to be romantic, but for me, I'm just like, I don't know about this messaging. But her writing is so incredible. It is just gripping and engaging. And all I wanted to do when I was reading this was just keep reading this. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up Someone to Romance by Mary Balogh, which is something like 7th book in this series. This is a series that I've been reading for a while. I just haven't picked up any of the books for a while. And then I realized, you know, I should go back to that series and read the other books that are in it. So this is basically about a woman whose brother is a duke, and she is, this is kind of a Regency romance. She has not really been that interested in getting married. Some stuff has gone down in her family before that made her just unsure that she even wanted to get married. But now she's like 25 and she's thinking, okay, maybe I should get married. She's rich, beautiful, titled, all these sorts of things. And so she knows she can get married if she wants to, but she just hasn't found the right person. And then somebody new comes to town, and this is a guy who is coming back to England after having lived in America for quite a while. And he just sort of decides, you know what, I think that you would be a good wife for me. And she's like, I don't know about this. He's very intent on what he wants. But she's like, fine, you want to court me? Go ahead and court me. You can woo me if you want. And so he goes ahead, and he's very different from all of her other suitors. But they just gradually sort of get to know one another and fall in love. Obviously, it's a romance. But there's quite a bit in this about him and his background. So the reasons why he went to America, why he came back, his responsibilities, some issues with his relatives and his history. So there's quite a bit of sort of unfolding of that mystery and trying to resolve what happened. And her family kind of comes in and helps as well. It gets a little over the top towards the end in the way that her family comes in and helps with everything. And also sort of at the beginning of the book, it's also just a little info dumpy, trying to introduce you to all of the characters in this very long series, which I felt like wasn't purely necessary. But overall, I did quite enjoy it. I love Mary Ballough's writing, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up Someone Perfect by Mary Balogh, which is something like the 9th book in the series. I know I think I had read the 8th book or something some time ago. I read them out of order. But this is maybe the last book in the series. I'm not sure. This one is about another kind of woman who's in this extended family in this series, who is also around 25, and she also has had some kind of issues in family in the past that have made her not really sure she wants to get married, but she could get married pretty easily if she wanted to, because again, she's beautiful and rich and titled. And you know, she's talking to her twin brother about this and being like, you know, I'm waiting for someone perfect. And he teases her about this. And then she meets a guy who's absolutely not perfect, like the exact opposite of everything that she would be interested in. And of course, they start to fall in love. And so this is kind of the way that their relationship slowly moves from sort of antagonistic to love. And just as they slowly get to know one another, and get to spend time with one another, they have a little bit of a forced proximity type of experience. But it's really interesting the way that develops. I quite like the characters in this. In the beginning, she's a little bit judgy, which I didn't love. But then as they go forward and get to know one another, the hero in this is actually like a little bit gruff on the exterior, but like super cinnamon roll on the inside, which I always like. And this one also has a little bit of a mystery of his past and sort of some things that happened, especially with his family, and some issues, the consequences of that as he's trying to reconnect with family. So I liked all of that. That was really interesting. And just the characters had great dynamics, and I really enjoyed, again, Mary Ballough's writing. So I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I did officially DNF one book. And before I talk about that, I just want to mention that over the past couple of months, I have put down a number of books that I picked up. So there were some books that I had started earlier in the year, some books that I just picked up, read a little bit of, and put down. And I didn't really record any of those. I wasn't up to it, and I knew that a lot of it was just my mood. So mentioning that I don't have very many DNFs right now, mainly because I'm not counting a lot of the things that I picked up, but this is actually like truly, it wasn't my mood. This is just not a book for me. So this is Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia's works, but I got to 33% in this, and there was a super creepy, violent scene in it, and I was just like, oh, we're at only 33%, and this is like over my threshold of what I want to see. So yeah. Basically, and I should have known, I mean, this is a horror novel, like it's within this sort of a horror film type genre where we have, it's set in the 90s, I think, in Mexico, and we have a woman who is a sound editor, and she gets pulled into working on this old film, kind of that maybe has some dark magic associated with it. And just at 33%, there was some ghost stuff that I was like, oh no, I'm not okay with this. This is gonna give me nightmares. And I reached out to my friend Cynthia at Book Whimsy, because I know that she's read this, and was like, hey, does it get worse from here? And she's like, oh yeah, it gets worse from there. So I was like, nope, this is not for me. So even though I do love Silvia Moreno Garcia's storytelling in general, I'm not up for anything that's got a little bit of that level of kind of grossness and creepiness. It'll just be too much for me. But I think that it's got a really interesting premise anyway. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read and DNF'd over the past like 5 weeks. I wanted to talk just a little bit about my plans going forward. So thankfully, I think that the busiest part of the year is now done. Some things are slowing down. Still, there's a lot to handle, but it's not quite as bad as it was the past 2 months. So I am finding myself really, one, enjoying the spring. It's absolutely lovely out. All I want to do is just go and enjoy the weather. But two, like I'm finding myself just having more interest in picking up books. And so that's really good. And having more interest in doing things such as sitting down and filming. So I'm going to try to go back to doing filming, but I'm also going to go easy on myself because things are still a bit busy in life. So rather than filming every week, a wrap up, I think I'm going to just do every 2 or 3 weeks, kind of depending on where life is and how many books I'm picking up. I'm still not reading that many books anyway, so it's not going to be a ton to wrap up. And then I'll just kind of fill in videos here and there as I'm in the mood. So I'm just not going to ask myself to do any sort of set schedule or try to produce a certain number of videos or anything. So it might just be a video every couple of weeks doing a wrap up. I might have other things that I'm interested in. And I'm going to kind of let go of some of the things that feel a little bit stressful when I do them for BookTube and just do the fun things. So I'm going to let go of right now doing anticipated releases because that is a little bit of work to do the research, and it's a little bit of stress to do the wrap-ups like a year later of like, what have I read? Because then I'm like, oh no, I haven't read these things, and so that feels pressure. So I'm just not going to do that right now, and I'll just pick up new releases as I go, as they interest me, and not worry so much about the lists and the tracking and everything. I also am just going to let go of some of the process of BookTube that is a little bit more stressful for me. So things like making notes about content warnings. I always feel like I have no idea what to write for that, and I do my best, but I'm not even sure that it's useful, and it just takes me out of the storytelling a little bit to have to kind of think, okay, what if this is like something that somebody might want to know about? So I'm just gonna let that go for now. And also when I'm editing, I'm just gonna let go of doing closed captions. That is the hardest part of editing for me. And I find that if I feel like I have to do the closed captions, it makes me really reluctant sometimes to film. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna let that go. I'm also gonna let go of like putting in timestamps. So just taking it easy, just doing kind of just back to basics, right? Just doing the reading, doing the wrap-ups, doing brief filming and editing, and just kind of go from there and see how it goes. And as I'm feeling more into things, maybe I'll do some of the kind of videos that I find more fun. Like I really like doing vlogs. They're quite a bit to edit, but they're also a lot of fun. So we'll see if I have the energy for that. But I'm also just hoping that I'll read more, because for the past couple of months, all I've been doing is like cozy SFF and romance. And only recently have I even bothered to pick up any sort of new releases. And I would love to actually, go out and explore books a little bit more. So I want my energy to go into my reading more than just my booktubing. So those are kind of my thoughts about what I'm going to do from here on out. And just see if I can make that rhythm work for me because things have been a little bit intense and I've been tired. But I hope that you guys are doing well. I'd love to know what you've been picking up. Have you been picking up new releases? Have you been just exhausted like I've been and just sticking to stuff that's more cozy? Have you been enjoying the spring? Again, it's been so lovely and I just want to go out and enjoy all of the flowers and the beautiful weather. So yeah, let me know how you're doing. I'd love to hear about it. Just put it down in the comments below.